So for those who feel deflated, the Palestinian cause is not affected by you giving up on it. Enough Muslims will buy into a false narrative that Saudi brought about peace because it normalized.
The Iranian Hezbollah narrative has always been that they will win in.
I don't get it. I'm bombarding these Palestinians. I'm destroying them. And I'm finding myself increasingly isolated. Here is the crux of the issue. The Palestinians aren't surrendering. And that's the point about Netanyahu's strategic objectives. He had none. He can't find one. He can't achieve one.
Is your optimism based on the political reality, or is it built on a more metaphysical sort of understanding?
When Galloway came and said, I've given up on the Arabs, it was the cause of Palestine that gave him the honor. The liberation of Palestine comes to the liberation of Syria and Egypt. If you feel deflated, that's on you.
This year, we've seen two Muslim countries move away from bitter dictatorships, Bangladesh and Syria, yet the horrific scenes in Gaza remain. Any joy that comes from Syria is always muted as we endure the horrific genocide perpetrated by the West and its colonial enterprise. Gaza exposes the hollowness of an international order. Now, the civil war in Sudan remains active. Pakistan's generals have consolidated power, and the Egyptian pharaoh Sisi seems comfortable aiding Israel in its bloodletting, and the Saudis are looking forward to selling Palestine for a US security deal. Alhamdulillah, today we have the pleasure of inviting Sami Hamdi back on the show again to look at the year ahead and the year gone. Please, as always, remember to subscribe to this podcast on your preferred platform. This helps us grow our audience. Alhamdulillah, we are now the second most listened to Muslim podcast on Apple. If you want to support the show, please think about becoming a patron. For a small monthly donation, you'll be helping to expand our reach and our content. Sami Hamdi, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to
Jazakallah khair for having me.
It's good to have you back in the UK, Sami. I hope you're enjoying the weather.
Alhamdulillah.
So, Sami, we've got a lot to get through today. I mean, I've sort of placed this show as our 2024 sum up, or as a way of looking back at this year, the highs and the lows, as well as to look ahead and to get some of your predictions about 2025, inshallah. But let's start, Sami, where we started at the start of the year. I think we had a podcast back in December last year on Gaza, and Gaza remains a problem today. There has been talk of a ceasefire, with the Saudis negotiating a normalization deal in exchange for the cessation of violence or Israeli violence. Is this how the Saudis are going to find acceptability for the Abraham Accords, to sign some sort of a ceasefire agreement with Gaza as the condition?
I think there are two ways to look at this. I think the first is to focus uniquely on Gaza. I think the reality is that there is a sense on the part of Netanyahu that he has crushed the Iranian proxies, that he has rendered Hezbollah almost impotent, although some rockets are still being fired here and there. But the assassination of a number of leaders, he will have celebrated that, and he will also celebrate the terms of the ceasefire that were negotiated with Hezbollah, in that Hezbollah were forced to accept terms that Netanyahu, or forced to accept terms that they didn't like, that Netanyahu wanted. And also the idea that even if militarily they haven't taken much in Lebanon, despite the ceasefire being signed, Netanyahu has continued to bomb Lebanon without necessarily much of a response from Hezbollah itself, as they try to reorganize and try to restructure and reorder themselves and adapt to what's happening in neighboring Syria as well, given the ire of the Syrian people who blame Iran and blame Hezbollah for propping up Bashar al-Assad and preventing their revolution from taking place. As a result of this sense from Netanyahu, he believes that he can continue now to bomb Gaza, particularly given that Gaza has fallen slightly amongst the headlines, and therefore there is a move now on the part of Netanyahu to try to really push settlers into Gaza and find some sort of safe area for the Israelis within Gaza itself, whereby to actually institute some sort of settlement or land that is taking place. He's struggling to do so, but he believes there is a window of opportunity to do so, given that he believes that militarily he is in the ascendancy. I think that also domestic population Israel itself, you'd have seen that viral podcast that went off to Israelis talking to each other, saying that as an Israeli, when we're partying and it feels much nicer dancing now, knowing there are thousands of Palestinians who are in homeless tents, knowing that they're being pounded and the like. And I think that accurately reflects Israeli sentiment. The more Netanyahu gives this impression that he's winning militarily, the more the Israelis are giving him a lifeline to continue bombing, to continue bombarding, or the like. I think the only thing that is on the horizon that suggests that the Saudis are willing to normalize is that Times of Israel reported that Trump informed Netanyahu that he has until the 20th of January to continue the genocide, 20th of January being the day that Trump enters the White House. Yes. Trump effectively told Netanyahu, according to the Times of Israel, that I don't want this happening on my watch. I want to be the guy who fixes what Biden broke. I want to be the individual. I want the world to say that Trump brought peace on an issue that Biden could not bring peace to. Yeah. And also the Qatari Prime Minister and the former Qatari Foreign Minister, Mohammed Al Thani, I wouldn't take the Times of Israel necessarily at face value. But the Qatari Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdurrahman Al Thani, also gave an interview to Reuters in which he said that he has confirmed, Trump has told Netanyahu that he needs to wrap this up soon before the 20th of January. I think in this context, there is now a flurry of negotiations that are taking place. And the Saudis feel like that they are caught in a very difficult situation. Syria, Bashar al-Assad has fallen. Remember, it was bin Salman who barged in on the UAE, which was trying to rehabilitate Bashar al-Assad, and said, no, I want to be the one who rehabilitates Bashar al-Assad. Let him come to Riyadh for the Arab League. It was bin Salman who felt that I need to make concessions to the Iranians because the US is not giving me protection. Let me spite the US by making concessions to the Iranians. He made those concessions and suddenly realized that the Iranian influence fell like a spider's web in Syria itself. So he's like, wait a minute, I'm now caught. I alienated the Syrian people. I alienated the new Syrian government. Erdogan, who came to me to ask for reconciliation, now suddenly he's in the ascendancy, not me again. Me and the UAE are clashing over the Vision 2030 because every time I'm considering to allow alcohol in Saudi Arabia, UAE goes and allows cohabitation without marriage between a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and they decide to build a casino. Every time I do one step, UAE ups the ante to try to bring Western companies to be based in the UAE. Bin Salman is saying, given that I'm struggling on these various different fronts, let me now use this opportunity, given Trump is now setting some sort of deadline, to try to maximize what I can get. I am out of the discussions regarding Syria. I am out of the discussions regarding the key issues that are taking place in the region. I am almost out of discussions on Yemen as well, because Yemen now, my allies are not necessarily happy with me. Let me use this process to approach normalization again in exchange for the three things I so desperately need, which are a NATO-style security agreement against the Iranians in case the Houthis hit again, support for Vision 2030. The line now is only going to be 12 kilometers long. Vision 2030 is not doing well economically or financially. Despite all the parties and the like, Saudi employment is not increasing because Saudis don't want to do the work of the Bengalis, the Pakistanis and the Egyptians and the Algerians that they bring. And he also wants access to nuclear technology. And therefore, Saudi Arabia is saying, if there's going to be a ceasefire, I need to have some sort of stake in it. So let me propose the normalization idea again in exchange for those three things and say that I'm doing it in exchange for a ceasefire with regards to Gaza itself. They are the ones offering Donald Trump this particular issue itself. But I think it comes from a sense of desperation, not necessarily from a sense of I genuinely care about what's happening in Gaza. No. The final point that is worth noting is that Israeli pundits on their TVs, there was a clip that went quite viral, which is of an Israeli analyst saying, I think on Channel 12 or the like, where he said that if you compare Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya being the Saudi channel, he says Al Arabiya is very refreshing to listen. It's basically, it brings all of our narratives and it broadcasts it as well. The idea being that bin Salman's position on Gaza remains the same, which is if the Israelis are attacking Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, go for it. If they're attacking Iranian proxies, Hezbollah, go for it. But if you're going to stop, give me some credit too in that I managed to bring. And I think bin Salman is flip-flapping in that regard. And the point worth noting here is, if you notice in Damascus, a Qatari delegation went to Damascus. Turkish delegation went to Damascus. Jordanian delegation went to Damascus. Lebanese delegation went to Damascus. Abdul Khaliq Abdullah from the UAE reported that a UAE ambassador also went and met Ahmed al-Shara and went to meet with the Syrian government. There is no sign of a Saudi delegation or picture that it's gone to Damascus.
Why?
And even the reports that it's gone, because some Saudis are saying that they've already gone, the question also lies in why did they not broadcast it? Why did they not show pictures of it? Yeah. Why didn't? And I think that reflects that the Saudis are not sure how to respond to talk of a ceasefire, to the events in Syria, to the ramifications on Yemen, and that's why they're going to what their original position was, which is that, guys, we've always been technically on peace. We want a ceasefire in Gaza. Here are our conditions. America, give us the whatever, and we'll discard the Palestinian state. And it may well be, and this is what the Saudis are gambling on, that Netanyahu will be very upset that Trump is going to force him in a ceasefire. If the rumors are true, he will be very upset. But Trump will use that normalization with Saudi Arabia to say to Netanyahu, you've come out of this mu'azzaz mukarram, you've come out of this elevated and with dignity, because not only did you demolish Gaza, not only did you destroy Syria's military capabilities, not only did you demolish Hezbollah, but Saudi even came and gave normalization. And I think it's a very powerful narrative, even if I don't agree with it. I think enough Muslims will buy into a false narrative that Saudi brought about peace because it normalized. And I think that Netanyahu might accept this PR exit if the Saudis offer it. Having said that, Netanyahu himself, and we can talk about this later on, is uncomfortable what's happening in Syria. He trusted the Syrian army to do nothing under Assad. He's not comfortable with this new government over it. And that might affect whether he actually agrees to this PR exit or not.
Okay, that's really interesting. A few strands I want to pick up on from what you've said there. But let's pick up on a small point you raised there, but I think it's an important point that requires some more clarification, and that is the Hezbollah peace deal, so-called ceasefire deal with the Israelis. From where I'm sitting, it's a fairly humiliating deal from Hezbollah's perspective. I mean, the Iranian Hezbollah narrative has always been that they were winning, they're in the ascendancy, and the Israelis are on the back foot. Yet the ceasefire clauses seem to imply that Israel got the upper hand there, and Israel is still striking parts of South Lebanon and still encroaching on Lebanese territory. In fact, they remain on Lebanese territory. Like, why did Hezbollah sign what seems like such a humiliating agreement?
I would push back on the word humiliating, and I'll explain why. I don't think there is any humiliation in standing up for Palestine. I don't think there's any humiliation in using your limited means to do what the rest of the Muslim leaders failed to do, which is to stand up for Gaza and stand up for Palestine.
Yeah.
There's one thing that we have to be absolutely blunt about. Hassan Nasrallah could have done what the UAE did. He could have said, Israel has every right to do what it wants to do in Gaza. It's the Palestinians' fault. It's Hamas's fault. They went and did something that I didn't even agree with, and therefore they should pay the price for it. This was the UAE narrative. They could have done like Saudi Arabia, where Bin Salman's channels, Al Arabiya and the like, they brought on Khalid Mish'al from Hamas, and they said to Khalid Mish'al, why on earth did you do this? You have wrecked Palestine, you have wrecked Gaza, you brought destruction on it, and now you reap what you sow. They could have said this. They could have done like Erdogan, which is to say that I want to mediate between the two of them. I don't want any problems here with the Israelis. I don't want any issue, and I want Hamas. I need you out of Ankara as quickly as possible. Just get out of here. They chose not to do so. Not out of a position of strength. No one can argue that Hassan Nasrallah believed himself to be militarily superior to the Israelis. Absolutely not. Hassan Nasrallah famously said in 2006, if I knew the destruction that would be wrought on Lebanon, I would not have fired those missiles into Israel itself. Nevertheless, Hezbollah decided to go get involved. I'm not necessarily praising them. I'm saying that this is different from humiliation. The reason why I'm not necessarily praising them is I'm aware of what they did in Syria. That for me, that makes it a bit enough. But in any case, as a result of Hezbollah's intervention, the Israelis had to delay their ground offensive because they were not sure to what extent Hezbollah would go, and therefore they needed to test out to what extent. Hezbollah drove out 60,000 Israelis out of land that the Israelis had stolen, leaving them in the north, causing Netanyahu a huge humiliation. Netanyahu tried to bomb them into silence, and they kept going. Even though they destroyed swathes of southern Lebanon, they've been unable to occupy much territory. In terms of investment versus return, their return is very low. The only way they could actually target Hezbollah was to go and kill so many Lebanese that even Macron of France ended up turning against the Israelis. He said this is ridiculous because Macron considers it a former colony. Hezbollah's antics against the Israelis also exposed their military deficiencies, them, the Houthis, and the Iranians. When the Iranians fired those missiles, even though I believe it was orchestrated, I believe it was more theater, I believe the Iranians made sure that the drones went slowly so Israel would destroy them, only 25% of those missiles were intercepted by the Iron Dome. 75% were intercepted by US battleships, French support, Saudi intelligence, and Jordanian missiles. In other words, they expose that Israel is not actually as strong as people think it is. Without the US, Israel cannot stand. All of these are things that don't necessarily suggest that Hezbollah did nothing. I think what happened was, was that the Iranian failure to respond effectively to the Israelis when they attacked. The Israelis perceived Iran to be bigger than it actually was. The Israelis truly believed that Iran would respond in much heavier fashion. But when Iran responded very meekly to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh that took place in Tehran itself and the like, Israel suddenly felt, hang on, these guys are bluffing. Wait a minute. Why don't I actually go after Lebanon and just bomb the living daylights out of it? Because I'm not getting any success in Gaza. Gaza, I've been bombing it for how many months? Is there any settlement in Gaza today after 12 months? None. They're unable to establish a settlement. They're unable to establish any real control. Israeli soldiers are still being ambushed. Again, this is all analysis. It's not about whether you're for or against. Israeli soldiers still being ambushed, and people are still asking, what's the reward for Gaza? As a result, Netanyahu tried to go West Bank. But according to Times of Israel and according to some of the other Israeli press, Trump has said that annexation of the West Bank is off the table. So we had to go to Lebanon. And even in Lebanon, when you think about it, a victory in Netanyahu's eyes would have been the seizure of territory in Lebanon and the utter decimation of Hezbollah. So while Hezbollah were forced into a ceasefire because of Israeli demolition, I wouldn't call it humiliating. I would call it a sense of both parties realized they can't actually win here, and they came to an agreement that neither likes. Israel doesn't like the agreement because in reality it didn't achieve its objectives of occupying more land in Lebanon. Right. And Hezbollah doesn't like the agreement because it had to agree to terms to allow Israel to bomb inside Beirut. But the agreement itself, when you think about it, why did Netanyahu sign it if he was in the ascendancy militarily? What made Netanyahu agree to that ceasefire if he's in the military, if he's ascendancy in military? It's because Netanyahu does not trust his capabilities to continue in that war with Hezbollah. That doesn't mean Hezbollah is strong. That doesn't mean Hezbollah is this powerful force. It doesn't mean Netanyahu is strong. It means Hezbollah did enough to frustrate Netanyahu into a ceasefire. And while Hezbollah is forced to take damage and terms it doesn't like, so is Netanyahu. Is that called a victory? I don't know. Is that called a defeat? I don't think so. Is that called humiliation? I don't think so. Is it beneficial for the Palestinians? I don't know. Does it mean that Hezbollah deserves some credit? I'm not sure. What I'm saying is that I think that in our emotive approach to deep scars in our communities, in which a lot of sectarian violence was committed, particularly by Hezbollah against the Syrians, I think many have the approach, and I will understand it, in that Hezbollah versus Israel, Iran versus Israel, was a case of Allah not making a situation of good versus evil, but that Allah hit a tyrant with a tyrant. And I think many are viewing Syria in that one tyrant was weakened, Netanyahu, the other tyrant was weakened, Hezbollah and Iran. Therefore, Israel was forced into a ceasefire it did not want, while Hezbollah was weakened sufficiently for Assad to fall because it was the only reason Assad was still standing. Iran was weakened enough for Assad to fall. And Allah weakened both tyrants, which allowed changes to take place, such as that in Syria. Make of that what you will, but I do think that the ceasefire is not definitive. I think that there's more to take place at this moment in time. And the final point to mention is this. If it was as much of a victory for the Israelis as the Israelis claim, and as much of a humiliation as the detractors of Hezbollah claim, I think that US would have found it much easier to form a government in Beirut. Remember, they assigned an envoy to go and make a new government in Lebanon that would oust Hezbollah, because the ruling government is an alliance between, ironically, the Christian Maronites and Shia Hezbollah. They formed the government in order to push the Sunni bloc out. The Americans, when they went in to try to form a government, they went to the Christians, they went to these others, and they said, we want Hezbollah out and we want a new government where Hezbollah have no influence. There's no new government in Lebanon, which means the Americans failed to convince the Christians to abandon Hezbollah. The Americans failed to find an alternative government. The Americans failed to get Hezbollah politically kicked out of the Lebanese government, meaning that for all of the talk of the victory, Americans are unable to capitalize, Macron is unable to capitalize, Netanyahu is unable to capitalize, and Hezbollah is unable to capitalize. And that's why I think it's more of a stalemate than a victory for either side. It's a ceasefire that nobody likes, and therefore I don't think it's about victory or humiliation. I think Hezbollah did what they could with their own intentions. I think there is a sincerity in their defense of Palestine. What I disagree with Hezbollah and what I get in a lot of trouble for is, I believe that their vision for Palestine or liberation for Palestine is at the expense of millions and millions of Muslims who they believe can be legitimately killed so that they can go and liberate Palestine. Whereas my argument is that the population should be liberated and free in order to allow Palestine to go forward. And that includes Sunni Shia unity and the like. And that's why when I call on the Shia, I always say to them, I'm not saying that it's sectarian rhetoric. I'm saying that the Shia militias killed Sunnis in the name of Al-Hussein. Please stop doing that so that we can get together and then go towards Palestine itself.
All right, Jazakallah khair. That's a really good clarification, Sami. So let's then talk about Netanyahu over this past year. He set off with a series of strategic aims and objectives. I mean, how far has Israel achieved what they set out to achieve over this past year?
I don't think Netanyahu had a set of aims and objectives. I think Netanyahu was so stunned by what happened on October 7th that he lashed out without thinking and essentially thought to himself, let me bomb the living daylights out of Gaza until I figure out what the strategic aims and objectives should be.
Right.
Netanyahu marketed himself as Mr. Security. Nothing happens under my watch. I have the Palestinians so suffocated. I have them so firmly in an iron prison that is called Gaza that there is no way they can do anything. I have eyes everywhere. I am in charge of security of over 80% of the West Bank. Nothing can happen under my watch. And when October 7th happened, at the scale at which it happened, that surprised everybody, probably including Hamas itself. Yeah. I think that Netanyahu lashed out and thought, hang on a second, this is a disaster. This is the first time Palestinians penetrate Greater Israel, or Israel proper, as they refer to it. And this is the first time they've done so since 1948. And even if they are defeated, the fact that they managed to take me by surprise might encourage other movements to do the same in future, because suddenly now I look weak. Moreover, when Hezbollah's missiles and Houthi missiles are penetrating Tel Aviv, my Iron Dome doesn't work anymore. Suddenly, I'm no longer the invincible army, and I need to kill in order to do the invincible army. Yeah. John Mearsheimer has a very good theory about this. He says that the Israeli policy essentially is that the more I kill, the higher price I make the Palestinians pay, the more hesitant they will be to resist me in future. And I think that was Netanyahu's policy. Let me bomb Palestine into oblivion so that the next time they even think about revolting against me or trying to take land back, they themselves in their own community will say, don't do it, because the last time we did it, look what happened to us. Let's just accept the occupation. It's the same tactic that the French deployed in 1945 in Algeria, when a group of Algerians protested in Guelma, Kharata and Stif after 1945, when the French were liberated from Nazi Germany. When the Algerians came out, and the French were so horrified that an occupied people wanted freedom that they proceeded to massacre more than 50,000 in 1 week. And the aim of the French, in their own documents, stated that the reason we wanted to do maximum damage, including the slaughter of women and children, the reason we had to do it was we wanted to impose on the Algerian psyche that the desire for freedom comes at such a high price, it's not worth it. If you dare to ask freedom from us, we will slaughter not only 50,000 1 week, we can do much more. This was Netanyahu's tactic. The problem for Netanyahu, however, is in the pursuit of this tactic, he ended up making Israel a pariah state, because the more he killed, the more his own allies started turning on him. I don't know if you saw that Candace Owens interview last week with Piers Morgan, where she says to Piers, you know my career. I was on the Zionist team for most of my career until I saw the reality of what Israel was doing. They went so far, they alienated even Candace Owens. They went so far, they alienated Tucker Carlson, who's now under heavy slack for interviewing Jeffrey Sachs, because Jeffrey Sachs came out and said that our foreign policy is governed by the Israelis. It's not an American foreign policy. Israel went so far, Netanyahu went so far, their allies are turning against him. Now, the more he turns against them, Netanyahu's conclusion is they're turning against him because they don't believe I can finish the job. So he ups the ante to try to finish the job, but it only turns more people against him. ICJ starts ruling that Israel must stand trial for genocide. ICC, they threatened Karim Khan with sexual harassment cases. And still he went forward and went for the ICC arrest warrant. They are saying we're going to close the embassy in Ireland. And now Ireland are saying we'll turn it into a Palestinian museum. Netanyahu is like, I don't get it. I'm bombarding these Palestinians. I'm destroying them. And I'm finding myself increasingly isolated. There Polish media is reporting that Netanyahu is not going to the Auschwitz memorial because he's worried that he'll be arrested with the ICC. Netanyahu cannot fathom a world in which He kills and is being held to account for it. He's confused by it. Why is the world turning against me? Why am I not achieving my strategic objectives? Which is why he bombs even more. And this is where the mantra comes, in that even though the casualty toll amongst the Palestinians is astronomically tragic, it is Israel that is losing and Palestine that is winning, because options are now available to the Palestinians diplomatically and politically that were not available before as a result of Netanyahu's outrage. And the proof that Netanyahu has no strategy is that Netanyahu bombed Gaza into oblivion, didn't take any land. So he decided to go to the West Bank, and he got tapped on the hand, and Biden told him, hey, the Saudis are saying that they need some sort of PR for normalization. They need a Palestinian state, which is the West Bank, even though you rule 80%. Don't touch the West Bank. So Netanyahu goes north to Lebanon. He's forced into a ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah. Then Syria happens. He says, okay, let me go and try and take Syria instead. He goes towards Syria and finds Erdogan quickly establishing air bases and military bases, because Erdogan can't do anything against the Israelis with Turkey alone. But historically, now he has Syria in his hands as well, and potentially Egypt now panicking, Sisi panicking in Egypt himself. If Erdogan completes that crescent and adds Libya to it, with Sunni Libya too, Erdogan is not bin Zayed or bin Salman. Erdogan is not telling the Israelis, I want good ties. Erdogan is very clearly making it clear to the Israelis, privately, you ask any Israeli, we know that Erdogan gives us sweet words in private, but in his heart he dreams of conquering Jerusalem. They don't say that about bin Salman or bin Zayed. So the point is, Netanyahu realizes, oh my goodness, Assad fell. Israel's plan in Syria, Netanyahu, was that if the Assad regime is there, and the reports now show it from the documents that they captured in Damascus, Assad was telling the Israelis, I'll cut my ties with the Iranians. He was giving them Iranian positions. He was giving them the positions of the Iranian militias for Israel to bomb. Syria under Assad was an impotent Syria. But Syria liberated is now a threat. So now Netanyahu before was only dealing with Gaza. Then he found himself dealing with Lebanon. Now he's got to deal with Syria, and he's got to deal with a Donald Trump who actually listens to Erdogan. Biden only listened to Netanyahu. Nikki Haley in the interview, I don't know if you saw it, she was in the interview, and she said, we, the government, the Republican government, need to listen to Erdogan on Syria. We should be dealing more with Erdogan, our partner. You have the Qataris now talking to Donald Trump. Trump is not Biden. Biden is ideologically Zionist. Trump is just a guy who cares about his own PR. He's even appointed the producer of Apprentice to his cabinet. The point that I'm saying is, for Netanyahu, the more he bombs, the more he finds himself in a disaster, the more he finds himself in a problem. So when you ask about Netanyahu's strategic objectives, he didn't have one in the beginning. He was stunned and taken by surprise, and he still doesn't have one now. And he believes the more Palestinians he kills, he might force the Palestinians into surrender. And here is the crux of the issue, and this is the point that I finish on. Here is the crux of the issue. The Palestinians aren't surrendering. They're not. In fact, people are even talking about toppling Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians aren't surrendering. And to be honest, it reminds you very much. I don't know if you've ever seen the film The Lion of the Desert about Omar Mukhtar and this Inna Lillahi. You actually haven't seen it. A'udhu Billah. I was actually talking to the audience. Asia, the Libyan hair has just gone like, Muhammad, honestly, I believe that and the message are essential viewing for any child growing up. And you, as soon as you leave here, you have to watch it. So Omar Mukhtar, he knows he's eventually going to get executed and captured by the Italians.
Yes.
So Graziani tells him, I want to understand. They've done the scene wonderfully in the movie, but it's authentic. It's the actual dialogue. I want to understand. You have such weak resources. You didn't have much. Why did you fight us and bring your country to ruin? He said, it was sufficient for us that we fought you. It was sufficient for us that we fought you. Graziani is still confused. So he says to him, how do you feel now that I've captured you? He said, what does it matter? We either win or we die and we go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. But you kill me today and you will fight the next generation. And you will fight the next generation. And each generation will fight you until liberation, because it's your occupation that brings the ruin to my nation, not my resistance to it. It's such a powerful scene. I don't do it justice when I say it. It's such a powerful scene that we grew up with. And Umar Mukhtar, in the book Muhammad Asad, he meets Umar Mukhtar. And Umar Mukhtar tells him that we're just waiting for the time in which we get captured. Umar Mukhtar never gave up. He said, I'll keep fighting. Fighting is enough. Yes. These Palestinians are not surrendering. They're not giving up. That's why it was fascinating. There is, I think her name is Rania Masri. She went once to ArabCon in the US. And she's asking a Palestinian on stage who was pro-Harris. And she said, I don't understand. The Palestinians are refusing to accept the crumbs. Why are you? The Palestinians are refusing to. Why? The Palestinians are refusing to back down. They're not surrendering. I don't know if you've ever hosted Mansour Schumann. I recommend you to host him. See how he speaks as a Palestinian. He was in Gaza from November to March. See how he speaks. He speaks like, we're not surrendering. We know that Allah is with us. We know that whatever price we have to pay, we pay for it. And this is Netanyahu's greatest problem. Why are they not surrendering? Why are they not giving up? Why do they keep going? Why are the Palestinians so relentless? Why are they suing us everywhere? Why is Mark Regev being dragged into Australian courts? Why are they making the Australian government buckle and reject 2 IDF soldiers from entering Australia? Why did they topple Harris? Why are they now going across Europe and turning Europe against me? Why have they made Poland off limits? Why have they suddenly Why do these Palestinians not give up? Why is it that when Assad falls, these Palestinians celebrate with the Syrians too, and they see it as one component? You had Mehreen Khan talking about last time how Islam unites the Muslim from Morocco all the way to Indonesia, Jakarta and beyond. Netanyahu is baffled and confused because he thinks strategic objective is in the demolition of the weapons. But when he looks through history, America bombed the living daylights out of Vietnam. The Viet Cong still kicked out the Americans. The French bombed the living daylights out of the Algerians. The Algerians still kicked them out. The Italians executed Omar Mukhtar. Allah yarhamu. The Shaheed, the Mujahid, the legend that you must watch this movie, Lion of the Desert. May Allah bless Mustafa Aqad, the one who made the movie and brought these stories to life so we could visualize it. They killed Omar Mukhtar. They colonized Libya. They made the Libyans it made it so difficult for them to resist. They still kicked the Italians out despite never being militarily superior. And Netanyahu is repeating that cycle of history. But because Palestinians know the history, they continue to hold firm and they keep going. Khalid Nabhan, Allah yarahmu, who got killed, soul of my soul, Ruh al-Ruh, was asked by Yasser Qadi at ICNA. I was at the ICNA convention. Was asked by Yasser Qadi, what advice do you have for it? He goes, hold steadfast to Allah. Allah is with us. There were pictures of him. Remember, he lost his granddaughter. He lost kids. He would go to families who are bereaved and tell them they are with Allah. They are alive. Don't say they are dead. They are alive. Don't say they are dead. And this is why when you read the film, when you watch the film, The Message, there's a wonderful scene. Again, accurate dialogue. Where Abu Sufyan in Uhud, a defeat. Abu Sufyan in Uhud goes and he shouts at the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ and says to them, Yawman bi yawm, Badr for Uhud, like our dead for your dead. And the Prophet says, reply to them, and they go, your dead, our dead are in paradise, and your dead are in hellfire. It's not the same. Yeah. The thief is not the same as the righteous person who has the title to the land. And that's the point about Netanyahu's strategic objectives. He had none. He can't find one. He can't achieve one because this ummah doesn't die and it keeps going. And this particular, I promise this is the final point on this particular issue in and of itself. The sense of deflation that somebody might feel in their activism for Palestine is not a reflection of how the Ummah feels.
Right.
Palestinians are not feeling deflated. They keep going. The Syrians didn't feel deflated. They kept going. Muslims around the world, Muhammad Jalal doesn't feel deflated. He keeps going. Asya doesn't feel deflated. She keeps going. Sulaiman doesn't feel deflated. He keeps going. People around the world keep going. If you feel deflated, that's on you. That's not on the Ummah. That's on you to ask yourself, what can I be doing more? But the reason why Netanyahu can't achieve a strategic objective, the reason why bin Salman is now panicking and sending oil to Syria when he wanted to topple the Syrian revolution and wanted to keep Assad in power, the reason the UAE are scrambling to invest money in civil society to call for a democracy it doesn't allow in its own country, to prevent religious groups, in the words of the UAE ambassador, from taking any power, is because people are always stronger than governments. People are always stronger than the armies, and Netanyahu is realizing that you can kill thousands of Palestinians, you can't kill Palestine. You can slaughter thousands of Palestinians' kids, you can't kill Palestine. You can massacre their mothers and their men and kill all of them and leave their corpses on the street for the cats to eat. Their souls go to Allah and they are alive with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just as Palestine remains alive, but you can't kill it. And that's why I actually argue that if you read history, if you read what happened in the last 100 years, Netanyahu is actually panicking. He's not speaking from a position of strength, because just as the French kept asking, why do the Algerians keep resisting? Just as the British kept asking, why do Egyptians and the Indians keep resisting? Netanyahu is asking the same question. Why do the Palestinians keep resisting? And let's be brutally honest, Jalal. Bring out a map on your tablet and identify where has Israel gained or expanded. You will be very hard pressed to find any place where it has truly expanded. And put that into context. The world's most modern army, backed by the superpower, could not defeat a ragtag group of Palestinians because the team that has Allah is superior to the team with the F-16s.
Sami, I listen to you, and subhanAllah, you sound extremely optimistic about the situation. Is your optimism built on the political reality, or is it built on a more metaphysical sort of understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and sort of the greater longue durée of Islamic victory? Because of course we believe from an Imam perspective that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately will reward the believers and will make the believers victorious. The reason why I ask this question is that in this last few weeks, over the last few weeks, I've come across lots of Muslims who've given up the fight. You know, they were really strong at the very beginning, and they did a lot of effort, alhamdulillah, for Palestine and for Gaza. They've sort of given up, and they see the constant scenes of tents on fire in Gaza, and they feel a sense of deflation and weakness. And not only that, by the way, we've come across, you know, we've had a series of so-called, you know, left-wing fighters for Palestine who over the last few weeks, maybe because of Syria as a backdrop, they've sort of given up on the Arabs. You saw that from George Galloway. You know, we've given up on the Arabs. Israel has won. The greater Israel project is now supreme. So it just seems to me that there's a combination of people there who have given up, and they sense the same political reality you're sensing. Who's right?
The first thing that I'll push back on, I never separate the metaphysical from the politics, ever.
Right.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who says in the Quran that he gives victory to whom he wills, and he inflicts defeat on whom he wills. وَيَوْمَ حُنَيْنٍ إِذْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ كَثْرَتُكُمْ. On the day of Hunayn, your numbers pleased you when you were superior in numbers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them almost defeated until they remembered that it's not our numbers that make us strong. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who delivers the victory, restore the intention and move forward, and Allah gave him the victory. I don't separate between the two. Badr was won because Allah gave them the strength to win in Badr when 300 faced 1,000. The politics was Muslims versus Quraysh. The metaphysical helped them to win as well. I believe in that wholeheartedly. I don't separate between the two. And believe me, I truly believe there is a problem with the Muslim who separates between the two.
Right.
The second reason worth noting is, I understand your question. So let's look at it politically.
Yeah.
What was Israel's preferred situation in Gaza? It is annexation, settlements, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and kicking them all off into Egypt. Have any one of these four been achieved?
Yeah.
What prevented any of those four from being achieved? The Palestinians.
Yeah.
Did they have any material superior to the Israelis? They did not. Do they have sufficient power to prevent the four? They clearly demonstrated that they have sufficient power to present the four. Is there anything I've said there that is not political? All of that is political. That's the analysis.
Yeah.
What do they want to annex it? West Bank. Does Netanyahu not dream day and night of annexing the West Bank? Why can he not annex the West Bank? What makes it difficult for him to annex the West Bank? What is the power that prevents him from annexing the West Bank? Is it because he's generous and says, I'll leave it for another day? Is it because he's kind and says, I want to leave it for the Palestinians? What prevents him from doing so? It is a political calculation and assessment in which he cannot do so because there is a political obstacle in the path, that is the Palestinians, qawman jabbarin, a mighty powerful people who it's not easy to defeat them because they don't take things lying down. Al-Aqsa. Is their dream to see Muslims praying Al-Aqsa or destroying Al-Aqsa and building the Temple Mount? Give me a political explanation why they have not been able to do so thus far. Is it because Netanyahu is generous and believes in pluralism and believes in diversity and believes that Al-Aqsa should stay because these Masakeen Muslims, we took their land, they should be allowed to pray in Al-Aqsa? No, it's not. He has been trying to demolish Sheikh Jarrah and demolish the areas around Al-Aqsa in order to be able to undermine the Temple Mount, undermine Al-Aqsa. Why has he been unable to do so? It's because there is an obstacle in his way. What obstacle stands in his way, Muhammad Jalal? It is the Muslims who visit Al-Aqsa. It is the Palestinians who stay in Al-Aqsa. It is the Palestinians who refuse to sell their homes to the UAE, who are handing those homes subsequently to the Israelis. It is the Palestinians who stand in their way. There is power in those Palestinians that prevents Netanyahu from having his way. Let's go more broader, because I know people don't like the idea of ordinary power. I was watching The Hobbit yesterday with my kids. Me and my wife, she said, we want to watch The Hobbit. Yes. And subhanAllah, there is a scene with, who's that lady of the lake? I can't remember her name. She's talking to Gandalf. And she says to Gandalf, why The Hobbit? Why have you included somebody who is objectively powerless? Is not a warrior, not a wise man, not nothing. Why have you included him with Thorin, son of Thrain? Why have you included him with these other dwarves who are used to power? And Gandalf says, I don't know. But Saruman believes that only great power can keep great power in check. But I have found this is not the case. I have found that it is the ordinary everyday acts of kindness, of love, ordinary acts of holding up what is right, done by the ordinary people, that keeps the darkness at bay. It is the ordinary Palestinians, not great power of Saudi that abandoned the Palestinians, not great power of UAE that abandoned the Palestinians. It is the ordinary power of the Palestinians that keeps the great power of Netanyahu at bay, that keeps the great power of the Israelis away from Al-Aqsa. Is there anything here that I've said that is politically inaccurate? Or is Netanyahu more generous than we assume? Look more broadly, forget Palestine itself, and forgive me for pressing this answer on you just a little bit. No. You look at Syria, for example. Netanyahu, when did Assad ever attack the Israelis? In fact, Assad attacked Palestinians in Lebanon, and Assad detained Palestinians in Syria. And under Assad, the Syrian army posed no threat to the Israelis, nor did it make an attempt to attack the Golan Heights. When did Israel attack Syria seriously and go to take military installations? When Assad was gone. Because the guy we relied on to make sure the army was impotent is gone. We don't trust a free Syria to use the army in a way that Assad did. We need to wipe out their military installations to make them impotent. What Israel wanted in Syria was, they wanted a northeastern Kurdish area, they wanted a southern pro-Iran area, and they wanted Damascus limited under UAE tutelage. They wanted Damascus limited on UAE, paralyzed and unable. They wanted Syria split into three. Now Syria looks like it could actually be united. Yeah. Now under Trump, under Biden, impossible. Under Trump doesn't give a damn about these Kurdish forces in the northeast, these Marxist leftist Kurds who have been oppressing their own Muslim Kurdish population. It may well be Trump says, I'm not interested in them. Erdogan, go in and, and do your thing. Yeah. Israel, when it looks towards Syria, it's not comfortable at all. Mohammed bin Salman doesn't want to normalize with the Israelis because he likes the Israelis. He's doing it because he wants something in return. UAE is not normalizing with the Israelis because it likes the Israelis. It wants something in return. No one likes the Israelis in the region itself. And you look more broadly as well, internationally. Before, you could never accuse Israel of an apartheid regime. You'd probably be arrested for it. You couldn't accuse Israel of genocide. Metropolitan Police might knock on your home. Now you can't. Metropolitan Police says it's protected. From the river to the sea, is protected. The court case, that Manchester student, who they revoked her visa coming from Canada because she said that we celebrated, that the Palestinians are still alive after October 7th. And the judge said under international law, they have the right to resistance, it's free speech. The court case ruled it's free speech. Yeah. Israelis are panicking. And that's why I argue that in reality, when you look at it, you say, is this optimism from a metaphysical perspective? What is Allah, a fable? Is Allah a fairy tale? Does the question that you've probably other people are asking, are you saying that I believe in fairy tales and fables, which is why I'm optimistic that somehow the power of Allah is a fairy tale and a fable, as if we don't believe his miracles can happen today? Is that what we're saying? Who knew Syria that Assad would fall in the manner that he did? Everybody believed that Assad was staying. Erdogan was inviting him to Ankara to have negotiations. The Saudis brought him to the Arab League. UAE were investing. They were lobbying US to lift sanctions and the like. And Russia was, happy with him and the whole shebang. But the point that I'm saying is this. The Muslim who is getting tired and believes that politically things aren't in their favor is illiterate in history. For wallahi, and this has always been my gripe with those who say the Ummah is weak. The Ummah has never been weak. The Caliphate fell, Britain couldn't capitalize. They were out of Egypt within 40 years. The Caliphate fell, they couldn't capitalize. The French were kicked out of Algeria in less than 40 years. The Caliphate fell, the Italians couldn't capitalize. They were kicked out of Libya. If the be-all and end-all ended with the Caliphate, why did the Ummah not die with the Caliphate? Yeah. And this is the point that I keep making with people. You may believe that the politics looks bleak, but Netanyahu doesn't believe the politics looks bleak. When you look at Harris losing because of Gaza, when you see Donald Trump thanking Muslim Americans, when you see the world shifting away from the Israelis, it is abundantly clear that politically speaking, it's Israel that's on the back foot. But the final point I'll make here is this. Yeah. The reason people feel deflated is because of the incessant videos and pictures of Palestinians being killed that truly break our hearts. That truly, when you see those pictures of those kids with their heads blown off, when you see the images of the cats eating corpses on the street because Palestinians can't bury the bodies, when you see now there aren't even enough garbage bags anymore to put the limbs in so people just leave them on the streets, when you see that the Israelis aren't even allowing basic medicine to enter, to go through into Palestine, it is heartbreaking to believe that the world has allowed this to happen. It is true, it is heartbreaking. But it was equally heartbreaking for those who lived 132 years of occupation in Algeria to see what the French did to them and have no power to drive the French out. It was heartbreaking for Omar Mukhtar to see the end of his life, him being hanged by Graziani of the Italians, but still have the belief they could kick the Italians out. And he knew that he would be hanged and knew he would be captured, but he kept going anyway. It must have been heartbreaking for him to wish he had more power to drive the Italians, but could only summon the power that he had at that particular time. It must have been heartbreaking for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to watch Abu Jandal and these others in Quraysh who couldn't make it to Medina be persecuted for their faith and not be able to do anything. It must have been heartbreaking for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say to Abu Jandal after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Sabran ya Abu Jandal, I can't take you back with me today. Be patient, be patient. They just signed 10 years and Ali ibn Abi Talib is furious. Umar Khattab is furious. It must have been heartbreaking for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say Sabran ya Abu Jandal. It must have been heartbreaking for him, kicked out of Taif, bleeding from the like, and saying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah, are you angry with me that you allowed this to happen to me? And if you're not angry with me, then Ya Allah, please accept my forgiveness. I could not convince them. And look at the attitude of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He doesn't give up even though he believes he doesn't have the power. What does he do, Ya Muhammad Jalal? And this is the point. Is the seerah a fairy tale and a fable to you that somehow you believe it like Lord of the Rings and the like? Or do you believe that it actually happened, that even in the absence of power, he still moved sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the power became manifest? And this is the point. For those who feel deflated, I don't think you're feeling deflated in the sense of nothing can be done, because things are being done. You are deflated at the pace that Allah has decreed this battle of justice. And that's a dangerous sentiment. That's a sentiment that Yunus alayhi salam felt and therefore abandoned his people, and Allah punished him. He was swallowed by the whale and only released when he acknowledged that not that he had made a mistake, that he acknowledged that he had been from the zalimeen, from the wrongdoers. What's the dua that gets Yunus out? Allahumma la ilaha illa anta subhanak inni kuntu min al-zalimin. Allahumma, truly, when I abandoned the cause because I felt deflated, when I abandoned it because things weren't coming at the pace that I want, when I abandoned it because the outcomes weren't outcomes that I liked, when I abandoned it because things seemed to get worse, I abandoned the cause. Truly, Ya Rabb, I was from the zalimeen. And when Allah releases Yunus alayhi salam, and here is the thing that I fear the most for all of us, when Yunus comes back, does he go back and convince his people? No, he goes back and finds his people guided. He finds the victory already delivered. He was just impatient. Allah had already decreed it, and he decided to walk away from it. So for those who feel deflated, the Palestinian cause is not affected by you giving up on it. The Palestinian cause of justice is not affected because you sit down. Allah is sufficient for them. Allah is going to give them victory. But those who feel deflated, wallahi, the feeling when victory comes and you realize that you sat out because you couldn't see where victory comes from is worse than the feeling of heartbreak that you will feel today. And this is the point that I finish on. It's not the Palestinians that need you. It is not Allah that needs the Muslims. It is not Islam that needs Muslims. It's Muslims that need Islam. It's Muslims that need Allah. For Allah chooses his vehicle as he wishes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change tomorrow the vehicle. If you choose to stop doing thinking Muslim, Jalal, and I love you. You know, and I've seen, mashallah, you rise. But if you stop doing this today, there's somebody else who's going to do it as well. I'm not taking away from you. I'm saying that it's not you that makes Islam great. It's Islam that makes you great. As long as you remember this, Allah will always give you izzah. The moment you flip it, Allah will humiliate you as he humiliated people before you. And that's why I argue for those who are deflated. Don't stop now. Don't stop now just because the battle is hard. Don't stop now just because the struggle is hard. Don't stop now just because you're feeling the heartbreak. Get back up and keep moving, because every story of justice is one of struggle. And the reality is, when people look back on the story of Palestine, they will record everybody who supported it. And the reality is that even if you're not alive to see it, you will see it eventually. And that's why I always love the story. And I promise this is the final story. I know I pushed this one a bit too long. I love the story of Dino in Bosnia when he was asked by these New Yorkers. And they said to Dino, how do you reconcile? Serbians slaughtered your family. They slaughtered your relatives. And no justice was delivered. You were forced to live with them side by side again. And America paralyzed your country into 3 presidencies. How do you reconcile it? And you all just went back to day as if nothing happened. He said, Wallah, I imagine one day holding his cup. He goes, Wallah, I imagine one day, inshallah, in Jannah, I'll ask Allah to show me the movie from start to finish. I didn't think anything of it. A New Yorker tells me afterwards, Sami, did you see that? See what? Did you see the certainty with which he believes Allah's victory is going to come? Did you see the certainty with which he's satisfied with Allah's victory, even if he doesn't see it? And do you see the certainty with which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree will always be manifest regardless of the power that is on the other side? And that's why when Galloway came and said, I've given up on the Arabs, Galloway wasn't the one reinforcing the Arabs. It was the cause of Palestine that gave him the honor of being somebody who could stand up for justice. And that's why what I fear the most is not that Palestine will be destroyed. Palestine will not be destroyed. Allah has given the promise. I believe in Allah. You said metaphysical. The question implied, I know you didn't intend it this way. The question implied, I believe in a fable. Palestine will be free. I'm tired of this like metaphysical nonsense. I'm not tired of Quran. I'm not tired of Allah's promises. I'm not tired of Allah's will. I'm not tired of Allah's pace. Yes, maybe in my heart I think, Allahumma, sometimes I wish you could deliver it faster. But I know your way is better. Sometimes you love something and it's evil for you. I'm aware Allah has its way of doing things. I'm not tired of that promise. What I'm scared of the most is Allah will use a tongue other than mine. That Allah will use somebody other than me. That is the greatest humiliation that can befall anybody. And the reality is that many non-Muslims are entering Islam because of Palestine. What makes you deflated and makes them inspired? What makes you heartbroken and therefore resign yourself to sit on your couch, but make Sean King not only become Muslim, but travel the whole world talking for Palestine? What makes you so heartbroken and despair and say there's no point and have this sense of despair that is not from a Muslim, have that sense of heartbreak, but makes Megan Rice not only become Muslim, but dedicate a whole platform to Palestine? What do they see in the Palestinians that inspire them that you are unable to see? Why do you see something that makes you deflated? They see something that makes them embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and have the honor that Allah uses them to go and deliver the message of Palestine to those who didn't even care about Palestine before. Allah is always supreme. When you ask about optimism, and this is, I promise this since I finish on. When you ask about optimism, I'm not optimistic about what happens in the next year or the next 5 years or the next 10 years. I'm aware, like my mother is Algerian, my father is Tunisian. I know about the struggles. My relatives fought in the mountains against the French. My relatives fought with the Mujahideen of Muslims around the world. They fought. I know the stories. I know the struggles that they went through. I heard them. I grew up with those stories. None of them told me it was like buying candy from a shop. None of them said it. Sorry. None of them said it was like buying candy on a shop. Everybody said that it was a struggle, it was hard, and we never knew if we would win or not. What I'm optimistic about is not what happens in the next 5, 10 years. Yes. I'm optimistic Allah is always present. I'm optimistic nothing is outside His plan. I'm optimistic in predestination. I'm optimistic that every tyrant will stand before Allah Yawm al-Qiyamah. No one will escape justice. I am optimistic that they will stand alone in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And everyone who was wronged will be dragged on their faces in front of the Palestinians. Netanyahu will be dragged, and everyone who committed genocide. I am optimistic that Allah will bring them in front of Hind and Sidra and say to Sidra, tell me, my wonderful creation, what did this person do to you? And Sidra, she won't need to talk to Jalal. She doesn't need to talk to you who are deflated. She doesn't need to talk to me for validation. She will talk to Allah al-Qawi al-Jabbar. She will tell him, Ya Rabb, I was in Gaza and this is what they did to me. They blew my legs off. Allahumma, my ummah didn't come rushing for me. They were deflated. Allahumma, my ummah got bored of the headlines. They kept scrolling past. Allahumma, I knew I had only you. Do you remember the kid who said, when I meet Allah, I will tell him everything, the Syrian kid. When I meet Allah, they will tell Allah everything. Allah won't be like me and you, we're getting deflated. Allah will deliver justice. He will drag them to Jahannam in chains. Jahannam will say, they will ask Jahannam, Halim talat. Yawma naqulu li Jahannam. Halim talat. We will say to Jahannam, are you full? And Jahannam will say, Hal min mazid. Well, is there more? I have space for more. I have space for all the oppressors. I have space for all the wrongdoers. I'm not optimistic about what happens in the dunya. I'm optimistic that everything goes to an akhirah, which is why Omar Mukhtar, watch the movie, watch it. Which is why Omar Mukhtar says to Graziani, what is death to us? If we win, we win. If we die, We go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَإِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. He talks about it like it's a beautiful reunion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why I caution the Muslim, never talk of the metaphysical like it's something beneath you. Never talk of the metaphysical like it's something that's not a political consideration. For the whole world believed Assad was going to stay, Allah toppled him. The whole world believed that France was going to stay in Algeria, Algerians kicked them out. The whole world believed that the world would stay colonized of an empire where the sun doesn't set and that empire doesn't exist anymore. Why doesn't it exist, Jalal? Because they plan and Allah plans, and Allah truly is the best of planners.
Sami, I would like to turn to Syria in greater detail in a second, but I want to just focus on Egypt and Sisi. Now, we know that the route to Jerusalem is through Syria and Egypt, and we know that was the route that Salahuddin Ayyubi rahmatullah alayh took when he recaptured Jerusalem. Syria is back in the righteous hands. When we think about the pharaoh in Cairo, he seems to be riding high. I mean, he gave a press conference soon after the fall of Damascus, and as you know, in that press conference, he talked about, I mean, unashamedly, he talked about how his position was very strong, and the Egyptian people loved him, and he had never shed blood like Assad had, which is, of course, a fabrication. But it just seems to me that we don't even hear murmurs in Egypt as we're hearing in other places in the Muslim world. I mean, tell me about Egypt over this past year. I mean, it's played a central role. It's a pillar of Israel's genocide, yet it remains pretty strong, or at least seemingly strong, when it comes to Sisi and his position. Yeah.
As soon as Assad fell in Syria, Sisi gathered a meeting of all the military intelligence and military brass and had an emergency meeting to discuss.
Right.
I don't think they were discussing Syria because they cared about Syria. I think they were discussing that a movement has just toppled Assad. Assad has fallen, Syrians are free, and Egypt might take a lesson from Syria and start again. How can we prevent Egyptians from doing so?
Right.
In that meeting is an admission that they don't believe their iron grip to be as iron as we assume their iron grip to be. In that meeting is an admission that where we see something that is impenetrable, they believe it is very easily penetrable. Assad was perceived to be the shabiha mighty state, and it fell like a spider's web. And I think that meeting was an acknowledgement that Egypt might be the same. The second point worth noting is that in Egypt, in Sisi's press conference, he said, I haven't got blood on my hands, nor did I steal money. Who is he responding to? He's responding to Egyptians who believe that Sisi and Assad are in the same category, and therefore what happened to Assad might happen to Sisi. And he's doing what Mubarak did when Bin Ali fell, which is, we are not Tunis. I am not Bin Ali. I didn't do what Bin Ali did. Those confessions or those statements indicate Sisi is uncomfortable. Otherwise, why do the press conference? Yeah. Did you see any other leader in the region come out and say, we are not, or any other leader loved by his people, come out and say, we're not Bashar al-Assad? Did Erdogan come out and say, I'm not Bashar al-Assad or the like? He doesn't need to. It's a given that he's not Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah.
Did Amir Tamim come out and say it, for example? He didn't come out. Other leaders in the region, did Sultan of Oman, Sultan Haytham, did he come out and say, I'm not Bashar al-Assad, I haven't stolen money and I don't have blood on my hands? No one saw the need to do it except Sisi. And I think the very fact he did it betrays the fact that he believes that there is still an environment in Egypt that could explode in the way that Syria exploded and toppled Bashar al-Assad. Yeah. And that's why I always, again, metaphysical and the political, I believe they are one and the same in that oppression inevitably brings a state to fall and makes a dictator topple. I truly believe this. And I believe Sisi believed this too, which is why he is concerned about this as well. Yeah. I don't know where necessarily that's going to come from. I do think that one of the issues in Egypt is less that people are unwilling to go against Sisi and more that there is a sense of hopelessness in terms of that who can do a better job than Sisi? Where are, Ikhwan, didn't produce, we delivered them to power and they didn't produce either. Where is this hope going to come from? But I think in Syria, there was a sense that Idlib eventually would be the point at which, people march out and they topple Bashar al-Assad. I think Erdogan kept that alive. But I do think that even if we cannot identify how Sisi might fall, I think it is sufficient to know that Sisi certainly believes that he's not as solid in his position as he is. And it's worth noting that I actually think that Sisi was rescued by Gaza in a very contradictory term. Before Gaza, UAE and Saudi Arabia had started to cease funding Sisi. They felt he wasted all their money and they gave him billions. Turki al-Hamad, one of the prominent Saudi commentators who's very pro-Bin Salman, pro-government, did a thread that caused a diplomatic crisis with Egypt, where he said, we've given Egypt all this money and look how they wasted it. And the reason they waste it is they keep giving it to the army. Egypt needs to learn how to move more towards a civil state, and the army needs to learn how to reduce its grip. It caused a diplomatic crisis. An article came out, I think, in Al-Haram or one of these other papers, and Sisi ordered the article retracted in order to avoid a beef with Saudi Arabia. He essentially said, we need their money. Ush, like, what's wrong with you? The Saudis and the UAE, their withdrawal of money indicated that they wanted to see Sisi struggle, or they lost faith in him, and the indication was that Sisi might be changed, because if he can't produce the money or the goods, then change him for another general. When Gaza happened and Muslims came out in protest in Jordan and the like, UAE and Saudi panicked because they felt that Sisi should be changed within our framework. But if he's changed because of revolution, that's problematic for us. So they started pumping money once more into Sisi. Now that you have Syria, which was toppled without Saudi, UAE, without that kind of interference, and Assad, they couldn't rescue Assad, and neither could Iran, neither could Russia. I think Sisi is definitely concerned. And that's why I think when it comes to Egypt, just as we were surprised by Syria, just as Ummah was surprised by the liberation movements that kicked out colonization, just as the Ummah was surprised by King Faisal's oil embargo and the impact it had, just as the Ummah was surprised by the Arab Spring when bin Ali was toppled by Bouazizi, who burnt himself in my father's hometown of Sidi Bouzid, I think Allah is full of surprises and it could come from anywhere. Politically speaking, Sisi is concerned. Sisi does believe that he doesn't have the iron grip that he thinks he does. And I think that shows that our assessment, well, not our, I'm not interested in the assessment that you gave. That the assessment that he's strong is a flawed assessment, because even Sisi doesn't believe it.
We don't talk enough about Sisi in Egypt, I suppose, on this program, and his collusion with the Israelis. Can you give us a summary of just where Egypt or Sisi has been in this past year, and I suppose his betrayal, if that's not a strong word, when it comes to the Palestinians?
Sisi has kept the Rafah border closed. For Palestinians to cross, they have to pay about $5,000, $10,000 per person to pay to an Egyptian guard in order to be able to cross that particular border. Sisi has kept that border closed because he believes if he opens it, the Palestinians will come into Sinai Peninsula. They will set up tents, they will set up refugee tents, and then from those tents, they will fire rockets into Israel. If they fire rockets into Israel, Israel will invade the Sinai Peninsula with the support of the Americans. Sisi will be unable to rely on support from the UAE and Saudi Arabia. He believes that UAE and Saudi will probably support Israel's attack on the Sinai Peninsula. Al Arabiya will take charge of the PR campaign. UAE will come out and support the invasion as well. They will publicly say we're against it, while probably saying it doesn't bother us, it's not a big deal at all. And Sisi believes that in that particular instance, he can't rely on the Egyptian army, because the Egyptian army is designed to keep the Egyptians in a cage. It's not designed to fight enemies. So I think that Sisi believes in this particular case, I need to keep the Rafah border closed. The issue that people have with Sisi is, if you're going to keep it closed, at least allow uninterrupted aid to go in. Even that uninterrupted aid, he has allowed the Israelis to dictate what can go in and what can't go out. And he's refused to send any tanks to deliver aid, not to fight, to deliver aid. Even doing that, he has refrained from doing so. Moreover, Sisi has increased the amount of gas that he imports from the Israelis, helping their economy in that particular regard, because he believes that that gas is needed in order to keep prices at a state in which the Egyptians won't revolt against him. He's relying on the Israelis economically to keep the Egyptians in check, and by extension, benefiting the Israelis. There is a channel called Scene TV. They did a documentary with a Palestinian in Gaza, and they document him during the genocide and how he flees and he goes to Egypt and then he goes to South Africa afterwards. And they basically told him to record his whole ordeal on the phone. So they've done a wonderful documentary. I think it's, I'm Ahmed, I'm still alive. Something like that. So there's a scene in it. They did this premiere when I went to go in they did a premiere when I was in Doha. So they show Ahmed, the Palestinian, as he's crossing the border, they tell him, leave. You'll be more beneficial to us abroad in documenting in raising awareness for us. You don't need to stay here, just go. So as he's crossing the border, he's crying, you know, it really hurts him to leave. He goes, I really don't want to leave my people. When he goes to Egypt, he arrives in Cairo, and there's a heartbreaking scene in the documentary. He's in a mall and he's recording these Egyptians enjoying themselves, you know, in the cafe. And he's like, I don't believe it. Gaza's being literally demolished a few miles away. And here you'd never think that Palestine is being demolished. Like everyone's just going on their daily lives as if nothing is happening. It's a very heartbreaking scene in terms of what's happening. That's not to say Egyptian people have abandoned Palestine. I have a friend of mine who, we won't give details because they might get in trouble. But when I asked why do Egyptians not mobilize, they said Egyptians weep for the Palestinians. But if they stop even for a second in terms of their work, they won't have money for the dinner of the night. A lot of the Egyptian people are starved. You know, it's a very, the disparity in wealth is very, you know, the taxi driver can stop and talk to you, but that means that he can't have chicken for dinner, for example. And I think that's the society that Egypt's in, is that people are in such a state whereby even if they want to, there's the video that went viral, if you remember, of the Egyptian cab driver taking a Palestinian. The Palestinian wants to pay. And the Egyptian guy goes, La wallahi, I won't take money from you. And the Palestinian goes, take it. He goes, La, and he starts crying. He goes, I can't believe that the best I can do for Palestine is not take your money. He goes, we failed you Palestinians. Wallah, I won't take a dime from you. And he weeps and he weeps and he weeps. And I think that weeping is a reflection of the Egyptian people. They are weeping. They're like, not only, I remember a journalist said, yeah, Palestine, we are sorry. We are also colonized here in Egypt ourselves. And that's why, going back to your question, when you said the liberation of Palestine comes to the liberation of Syria and Egypt, Syria needed to be liberated from Bashar al-Assad. Egypt needs to be liberated from Sisi. It needs to be liberated from these entities that are averse, that are designed to be against the people's will. And that is the reason why I think the Americans scrambled to go to Damascus, because they want to know what are these people going to do, because they are terrified that if Syria is truly free and the government represents the will of the Syrian people, Israel is on a ticking time bomb in terms of what the Muslims will do to it. Yeah. And the Muslims wouldn't do it out of revenge. They would do it out of justice, to say that this is land that should go back to the Palestinians. Let's live harmoniously as we did before, and the Israelis are firmly against that. It's not that we don't talk enough about Egypt. Yeah. It's that we don't talk enough about what kind of political direction is there for Egypt, because it's very hard to identify. But that doesn't mean that one can't emerge suddenly out of nowhere in the way that it did in Syria.
I mean, if we were to compare very briefly the state apparatus in Syria, it almost collapsed by the time the cities were liberated. Whereas in Egypt, you know, as we learned from the time of Mohammed Morsi, there is a deep state, and that deep state is terrifically strong. It's very strong, and of course, it's propped up by the army, and the army is propped up by the United States and its military budget. And so, you know, in many ways, although on paper Syria looked very difficult, of course, and with the benefit of hindsight, which of course is meaningless, but the benefit of hindsight, we can see that, you know, there was a crumbling state, whereas Egypt still has these strong institutional apparatus that keep people like Sisi in power. Do you see a tangible difference between Syria and Egypt?
There is one difference, but we'll get to it. Yeah. I think one thing that's worth noting about Egypt, it is not necessarily the Americans themselves who keep Sisi upright. It is the manner in which the army has constructed the state. In that to succeed in anything in life, you need to be a soldier. الضابط في الجيش. You need to be a soldier in the army. The soldiers of the army are composed of many from poorer families whose salaries only come from their child who is in the army. Once they leave the army, because they were in the army, their contacts in the army get them the job, the civilian job. Everything has to go through the army in order to be able to get something. So even if you're a poor family that has no relation to America, you can't find success unless you somehow go through the army. Or it's very difficult to do so unless you have ties with the army itself. And if that is your bread and butter that keeps you barely afloat, it's very difficult to ask a poor man to go and revolt and plunge himself into abject poverty for sake of a greater cause that they're not entirely sure will be able to be delivered. I think that's part of the magnificence of the Prophet ﷺ in the way he convinces Bilal ibn Rabah and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and these other radiallahu ta'ala anhum to give up everything for the sake of Islam. But in any case, I think that is one of the key factors that makes it difficult. The difference with Syria is the army was toppled. You had groups that defeated the army. Groups that toppled the army, toppled the deep state, defeated the army in enough places whereby the army eventually just gave up. Also, Assad had alienated a lot of the army chiefs. There's a report that suggests that he lambasted them, calling them crooks and the like, which meant that the army also turned against them. I think the difference between the Arab Spring and Syria is, in the Arab Spring, it was a popular revolution, but the deep state managed to negotiate or compromise with the revolution. In Syria, he's basically taken over, or the HTS and the likes, have basically taken over the state military, and they can reconstruct it in the manner in which they wish.
Yes.
And I think that allows for greater maneuvering on the part of the Syrians than perhaps those Muhammad Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood had in Egypt. And that's why I argue that if you're comparing Egypt and Syria, I think they are two very distinct circumstances. I think that the manner of Assad's downfall is different from Mubarak's downfall. And that naturally lends itself to options that perhaps the Egyptians didn't have.
You very kindly sort of chastised me earlier on when I tried to delink the metaphysical from the practical and the political. I want you, in the final question, just look ahead to 2025 with Allah's power in mind and Allah's ability to change any circumstance. What do you think 2025 will look like, at least from a political perspective? And what can we be looking forward to, and what are the challenges ahead?
I think that after Syria, eyes will be on Libya.
Yeah.
Will something similar happen in Libya? Will it be decided? I think that there will be a spark, something that takes place. I think eyes will be on Egypt. I think that eyes will be on Donald Trump in terms of how he changes his policies, or changes Biden's policies in terms of what happened. I think that Israel now becoming a pariah state will have its implications abroad. I think there are a lot of new roads and channels that didn't exist before. But I think the reason for that is that ordinary people moved. In Syria, they moved. Lawyers, doctors. Obama famously said the opposition are just dentists, engineers, and these dentists, engineers, and the like took Damascus.
Yes.
These ordinary people, they moved in Syria. Ordinary people, they moved in America, they punished Harris. Ordinary people moved across Europe and they changed the whole narrative. Ordinary people moved and they shifted the debate amongst right-wingers who are now questioning whether Israel is actually an ally or not. Ordinary people moved and now they have changed the narrative and changed the international institutions in a way in which they're starting to call on Israel and starting to hold them to account in terms of denouncing them for their genocide and what's happening. Ordinary people moved. Amnesty is now brave enough to call what Israel is doing a genocide. Ordinary people moved in sufficient numbers and with sufficient voices and with sufficient resources that now Human Rights Watch is calling it apartheid and genocide. Now you have Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, also coming out and calling what Israel is doing ethnic cleansing. I think it's clear that the Palestinians now believe that they're continuing to struggle, they're continuing to resist. I think it's clear that bin Salman is uncertain and hesitant about where the region is going. UAE plots and plans, but not all is going to plan. They haven't taken Khartoum in Sudan. They haven't been able to get Haftar to take Tripoli in Libya. They haven't been able to get Sisi to feel comfortable. Sisi is feeling concerned there too. I think that when you look at what's happening across the world, there is an awakening that is taking place, an awakening that we thought was impossible. I think that when we look at it in terms of what's happening, it's not just Trump who will dictate what happens next. It's not just bin Salman. It's not just Erdogan. It's not just bin Zayed. It's not just the Keir Starmer or China or these other powers. It's ordinary people too. It's the people watching this podcast. It's those who go on their streets and think they have ordinary jobs, but don't realize that their power and their voices actually has impact, that their voice actually has power too. And I think that with all of the things that have happened in the past year, yes, we've witnessed tragedies, but we've also seen stories of hope. We've also seen stories of change. We've also seen stories that demonstrate that if we move, we can actually move, and Allah can actually bless the efforts and elevate those efforts too. And I think more boldly, when you look at the way that mainstream media now is no longer the go-to source for news, that now it is podcasts, now it is social media, now it is these groups that are able to have a room in which to advance their voice. The capabilities of da'wah have been phenomenal. Now that we've seen as Muslims that the da'wah is more than just the spiritual. Da'wah can be politics too, where you can get Owen Jones to come out and go and support the Palestinians and support the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, the dictatorial regime, and insist that justice should be central to all of our discussions. Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and these others, Ilan Pape, and all these others, and Gabo Mate, when you see all these people coming out, Francesca Albanese and these others, it demonstrates that da'wah does have power. And that's why I think Allah has already written what's going to happen in the next year. I'm not too worried about that. Allah has written what will happen in 5 years. The only thing that I am slightly concerned about is, can I keep the momentum up? Can I keep going as Sami? Can I keep going in terms of raising my voice when I feel like no one's listening? Can I keep protesting when I feel like it's not working? Can I keep boycotting? I went with a few friends the other day, one ordered a Coke and we all went, why are you ordering it for? He said, well, the boycott's not really working. You're like, have some faith. Ittaqillah, fear. He ended up taking the Coke bottle and putting it back and giving it back to the shop and telling him, listen, I'm not buying the Coke. The point is, can we keep boycotting? Can we keep advancing these? Can we keep going even when the outcome is not coming at the pace that we want? Okay. That's what I'm more concerned about. How can we keep the people motivated? And this is where I feel like the Ummah always has the power to be great. But I think that when we talk about motivation, I think motivation doesn't come from me talking into a camera and saying be motivated. Motivation comes from the certain belief that Allah exists, the certain belief that everything is in His hands, the certain belief that He knows what He's doing, and the certain belief that He always delivers. And that's why I think that over the next year or the next 5 years, what I would encourage more than anything else is read the book now, not as a spiritual book, but read the stories of the prophets, read the struggles that they went through, and notice at the end of every story how Allah delivers victory. And you will find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the stories of the prophets, wasn't telling you fables or fairy tales, nor was He telling you about angels. He was telling you about ordinary men, about ordinary women, people who made mistakes along the way, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgave them, guided them, and gave them victory too. That even when you go on this journey, I give you an example. When you read Surah Al-Kahf, there's a story about Musa alayhi salam meeting with Khidr. Why does the story come about? Because Musa says he's the wisest man, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says you're not. So Allah tells Musa to go and travel, and Musa will know that he's arrived to the point when his fishes disappeared. What does Musa alayhi salam say after he's traveled a great distance and exerted a great effort? The ayah says, لَقَدْ لَقِينَا فِي سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. Indeed, in this journey, it has proven fruitless. Who told him to go? Allah. Why did Allah tell him to go? To find the wise man. What did Musa alayhi salam, this is why I love Musa. Musa makes me feel better as a human being. What did Musa say? Musa went, take out the food and take out, thinking, لَقَدْ لَقِينَا فِي سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. And then here is, oh, wait, who told Musa? This is the point. What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say to Musa? Did He say, how dare you say that I sent you on a quest that brought you Nasaba? How dare you? He didn't. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought him Khidr, and Khidr delivers the lessons that we benefit from today. Allah is a wonderful Lord. Allah is a merciful Lord. Allah doesn't mind that you feel deflated. Allah doesn't mind if you lack motivation. Allah doesn't mind if there are some days where you feel like doing nothing. Allah doesn't mind. What Allah minds is if you choose based on that to do nothing. Allah likes the ones who keep going. The Prophet ﷺ got the wahi from Jibreel alayhi salam. And Muhammad ﷺ was receiving the hadith Qudusi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Jibreel alayhi salam. He knew Jannah was haqq. He knew Allah was haqq. But still, Allah tells us in the Quran that he and the Sahaba, they said, مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولُ رَسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَىٰ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. They said, when is the victory of Allah coming? Did Allah rebuke them for saying that? Allah instead said the victory of Allah is coming. So I say to you, or those who are listening, when you say, when is the victory of Allah coming? The Prophet said it too, don't worry. Yes. The Prophet ﷺ said it too, don't worry. And I'm saying to you what Allah said to them. Inna nasrullahi qareeb. You might be feeling where you say, what's the point of all these protests? We call on people, it's not making a difference. We post on social media, it's not making a difference. That's fine, say that. Because you're saying what Nuh alayhi salam said. رَبِّ إِنِّي دَعَوْتُ قَوْمِي لَيْلًا وَنَهَارًا وَلَمْ يَزِدْهُمْ دُعَائِي إِلَّا فِرَارًا وَأَنِّي كُلَّمَا دَعَوْتُمْ لِتَغْفِرَ لَهُمْ جَعَلُوا أَصَابِعَهُمْ فِي آذَانِهِمْ وَاسْتَغْشَوْا ثِيَابَهُمْ وَأَصَرُّوا وَاسْتَكْبَرُوا اسْتِكْبَارًا. I don't mind when Muslims say it. I don't berate them for it. They're just saying what Nuh alayhi salam said. Allahumma, I've called on my people day and night. And the more I call on them, the more I protest in London, the more people run away from me. And when I call on them, so they might stop this genocide. When I call on them, so you might forgive them, Allah, they put their fingers in their ears like Piers Morgan. They cover their faces like GB News, and they treat me with arrogance. You're not saying anything different than what Nuh alayhi salam said. When Shu'aib alayhi salam went to his people, you might be saying, the person, he said, who am I? I'm not a billionaire. I'm not somebody. But what did they say to Shu'aib alayhi salam when he called on them? They said, "Ma naraka alayna bi'aziz." We don't see you as one of the nobility. Who are you to talk to us? I get the feeling, I don't berate them. You're feeling like Shu'aib alayhi salam. This is prophetic. What you're feeling is prophetic. What is not prophetic is when you choose to do nothing because of that feeling. The prophetic is when you feel it. You tell yourself, you read the Quran and you say, oh, the prophets felt that way. Oh, Yusuf alayhi salam got thrown in a well and sold into slavery and put into prison for many years. It's like the Imran Khan guys. They say, oh, Imran Khan's in prison. I said, it might be a mercy. If he was in power now during Gaza, all the credit would have vanished because he probably wouldn't have been able to do anything. Maybe Allah is treating him like Yusuf alayhi salam. Leave him there where there can be no responsibility and then release him Mu'azzaz Mukarram as Aziz back to the premiership of Pakistan. You don't know. But look at Yusuf alayhi salam and read the ending, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala renders him Al-Aziz. Read the Quran, not like it's fables. Don't read it like and you want a spiritual boost. Don't read it like that. Read it like it's haqq. Read it like it's truth. Read it knowing it is truth. Read it with the certainty that it happened, not with the doubt that some is exaggerated. Read it like it is truth, and you will find that these are not stories that are in abstract. They relate to you directly. And as you read those stories in the Quran, you will find it's not Trump who makes the difference. It's not these other leaders who make the difference. It's you. It's whether you choose to move, whether you choose to strive, and whether you believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise. The promise that he gave is worth striving for, even if you don't see it in your lifetime. And that's the beauty of Islam, in that Islam did not put the responsibility of changing the world on my back. Islam put the responsibility to try. Islam did not tell me that you have to liberate Palestine to enter Jannah. Islam said you must deploy the powers I gave you to try, and even if you don't do so, Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, oh beautiful soul, because you tried, I give you Jannah. Alhamdulillah, Allah did not put that burden on us. Alhamdulillah, Allah did not tell us to do it. Alhamdulillah that Allah said to us, keep striving and keep moving, and I will reward every striving that you do. So praise be to this merciful Lord. I believe when we sit here, the ajr is racking up. I believe at night time when we tweet, I say, Allahumma, this is all I can do, but Allahumma accept it from me. Didn't the Prophet say, didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, فَمَن يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا, those who do even an atom of good deed, Allah sees it. Then Allah say that, then okay, this is surely more than an atom when I tweet. Surely it's more than an atom when I repost. Surely it's more than an atom when I protest. Surely it's more than an atom when I go and protest. If Allah the Almighty has said to me that we see this act and we will make it heavy on the scale, the question for every Muslim is not why do I feel deflated? The question is Allah's promise real enough to make me get up and move? Do I believe Allah's promise with certainty that I get up heartbroken and I keep moving? Is Allah haqq? Or is Allah a maybe? And that's why I say that the greatest fear that I have in my heart is that sometimes we feel spiritually high, but the action reveals there's no spirituality there. We feel like we are close to Allah when we feel it, but the reality to be close to Allah is in action, because these prophets, they went through those dark periods, but they kept going. And the reality is when you're going through a tunnel, you get to the middle of the tunnel where you can't see the other side. You have to keep walking to go and see the light of the tunnel. Ibadallah, keep moving and keep walking. The light is there, wallahi it is there. And one day we will sit with the Palestinians in Jannah and they will tell us wonderful stories. When you enter Jannah, you want to be the person to look at them and tell them, yes, I raised my voice too for you. Yes, I heard your call. Yes, I moved. I don't know if what I did worked, but alhamdulillah, I'm here with you. I want to tell you, Hind. I want to tell you, Sidra, I never abandoned you. I want to tell you, Hind Sidra, I never sat at home and told people what's the point. I want to tell you, Ya Hind, Ya Sidra, I did everything that I could, even if it was a mere tweet. I did everything because I knew one day Allah would put us in Jannah, and I wanted to be prepared that when I meet you in Jannah, I wanted to tell you, Ya Sidra, that when they blew your legs off, you weren't alone. I raised your voice for you. I tried to move for you. I used the ability that Allah had for me. You were never alone, Ya Sidra. You were never alone. You were never alone, Ya Hind Rajab. You were never alone. The Ummah didn't abandon you. We were with you. We wish we had more powers, but we did what we could. You were never alone. We loved you, though we never met you. And alhamdulillah, Allah united us here in Jannah, where I can tell you, Ya Sidra, it's an honor to sit with you, and it's an honor, and I know that Allah put me here because I tried for you, alhamdulillah. You want to be that person. You want to be that person. If you feel deflated, sometimes I feel deflated. I'm heartbroken of what's happening in Gaza. It's not that I'm optimistic in the sense of I don't care what's happening. It's that I believe that those who are watching this and those ordinary people, they can make the change. And I am begging them to keep moving because I know Harris lost because of them and Israel couldn't save her. I know that Israel is becoming a pariah state and even America can't save it. And I know it's because of these ordinary people. And I finish with the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Abu Sufyan was narrating to him his meeting with Heraclius, Heraclius says to him, and I always repeat it. Somebody said to me, Sami, you always repeat the same things. Allah repeated the Quran over and over 1400 years. And it doesn't make it any less relevant. فَذَكِرْ إِن نَفْعَتِ الذِّكْرَى. Heraclius says to Abu Sufyan, who are the people supporting this Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Abu Sufyan says, أَرَاذِلُنَا. It is the lowest of our society. And Heraclius says, Abu Sufyan, if what you say is true, this is the prophetic way. Read the Quran, you realize it's a prophetic way. This is the prophetic way. And if these ordinary people are the ones moving for him, then it is only a matter of time, Ya Abu Sufyan, before he takes Mecca from you and takes Rome from me. When you see Islam today, this beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he felt heartbroken, Khadija radiallahu anha died, did he give up and stop conveying his message? Did he say there's no point? When he felt deflated 13 years, being boycotted, beaten, his Sahaba being beaten because of a message of haqq, of justice, did he turn around and say, what's the point of doing anything? Why am I going to the Kaaba every day trying to call people to Islam? He didn't. He didn't. That's why read the seerah and you will realize this magnificent prophet was also a human being like you. And the reason Allah gave us the seerah is not because to be a book of fables or a book only for the elite. It's a book to tell us no matter how dark the times, the light is always there because Allah is always supreme and Muhammad is the prophet of this ummah.
Sami Hamdi, I know your father is waiting for you and he has a greater right over you than the Thinking Muslim podcast. So Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.